Okay. 5, 4, 3. You're now live.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, the third virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. I'm Councillor Peter Southgate. I will be chairing this evening. And for the benefit of anyone watching on YouTube, if I can introduce my colleagues. Alongside me in the top row, Councillor Owen Pritchard from Cricket Green Ward. Next to him, Councillor John Dehaney, Graveney Ward. John, give us a wave to make sure you're
Yes, yeah.
Second row, Councillor Edith Macaulay is the Cabinet Member for Equalities and Social Cohesion, and that affects our substantial item this evening. Next to her, Councillor Sally Kenny of Lower Morden, Councillor Paul Kohler, Trinity, Councillor Peter McCabe of Ravensbury, of course. Coming down, then we have next Councillor Nick McLean, Cannon Hill Ward, Councillor Natasha Irons of Ravensbury Ward, Councillor Ed Gretton representing Wimbledon Park, and then speaking shortly, Kieran Fagarwal is going to introduce the item on public space protection orders. So at the bottom row there, we have Councillor Joan Henry of Joan, I forgot, it's Pollard's Hill, I'm sorry, got that right. And Mansour Ahmed, our co-opted member. Good. Can I ask first for any declarations of interest? They're being done. And apologies for absence. Can I assume Colin Powell and
Yes.
Emma Lemon?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, can you just indicate if you dissent from these being accepted as a correct record? So there being no dissent, we will take those as agreed. There are two matters arising that I've noted. One is we asked about provision for the young people who found themselves homeless, and we've had a note from Housing Solutions manager, which has everyone seen that? And do we have any queries about it? We don't. Okay. And the other one was a question we raised about the whether our action plan for equalities and community cohesion address the issues now raised by the Black Lives Matter movement, and whether we were happy with the action plan or wanted to take an item on that earlier in the next year than the scheduled April date. What are people's feelings about that? Are we happy to leave it as scheduled for our April meeting, or Paul?
As only going through today, I haven't had the time to go through it yet, so I can't honestly answer. I don't know if everyone else has had a chance.
I've not had a chance either.
No, I was going to say.
I haven't seen it. Sorry about
too
that.
late
Yeah.
in the day.
Not seen it. Yeah.
Okay, I think what we'll do, we'll pick that up in our next September meeting. I mean, if you could make sure you've had a look by then, and to tell me whether you want to hear earlier than next April on how pertinent it is in addressing the issues raised by Black Lives Matter. Good. So our substantial item, as I have indicated, is the public space protection order. We have an opportunity to undertake pre-decision scrutiny on this before it goes to Cabinet in September. And it is quite a departure from our previous public space protection orders, so it needs to be looked at quite carefully. I'm going to ask Kieran to speak to that briefly, and then we'll take questions. Kieran, do you mind stepping in there and just giving us a short summary of the main points?
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out our proposal for a new, more localised public space protection order following the expiry of the current borough-wide public space protection order, which will expire on the 20th of October 2020. The focus of the proposed PSPO, which is a tool under the Antisocial Behaviour Act, will be in the wards of Lavender Fields, Graveney, Figs Marsh, Cricket Green and Ravensbury ward. In order to implement the PSPO, we've carried out some analysis of alcohol-related violence in and around Merton, and this has been done in a number of ways, including our perception survey and the data we've collected from the police and our own teams as well. And those are the wards where it's been highlighted, where it's much more prevalent and potentially supports the implementation of a public space protection order. As part of the process, we will be also conducting an equalities impact assessment. We've already started that. We've launched a public consultation on the 29th of June that will run for 4 weeks. And we're hoping and proposing that the response for the consultation, the equalities impact assessment, and alongside that, we're developing an engagement and enforcement plan, that all those documents will be presented to Cabinet in November for final sign-off. We're presenting this report to receive some comments and feedback from members of this committee. There is one area that I'd like to highlight in the report, that we are aware that potentially there could be displacement because it's not a borough-wide public space protection order, but we have highlighted in the report a number of ways that we can respond to that displacement. And that's a combination of us following through on action in terms of individuals who move from one place to the other through the use of a community protection notice. But alongside that, we will factor in a review of the public space protection order, so that if there is displacement into some of the neighbouring wards, there is the option to extend, just as there's the option to reduce the public space protection order. The key thing here, finally, I'd like to say is that it can be subject to a judicial review, and so therefore we've got to ensure that the order is proportionate and that we've got sufficient evidence to support it.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Let me ask first, yes, as Cabinet Member, Edith, would you like to come in?
I think just to start off by saying, in 2013, the council had a borough-wide controlled drinking zone. And in 2017, this order transitioned into a public space protection order. And one of the range of measures introduced by the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. Obviously, the act was introduced to address antisocial behaviour and the impact it was having on our local communities. Since 2017, Merton has had one borough-wide transition PSPO, and this obviously, as Karen said, will expire on the 20th of October this year. And we have looked at all the options which we have. We've reviewed up the options. And as she has mentioned, we've highlighted the 5 wards which Karen has indicated to us tonight. We have to also remember that we have a duty to have a public consultation. We started on the 29th of June, and it lasts for a period of 4 weeks to see what residents in the borough think about the whole issue. I mean, the main fact of the matter, as Karen has said, is it will be looked at, to see whether the 5 wards are okay, and if needs be that it has to be on other wards, then that will be looked at a later date. And we have to have robust evidence, to show that the PSPO is appropriate, and the data which we have shows that the problem in the Mitcham area is quite really highly highlighted. And obviously the wards of Graveney, Lavender Fields, Fitzmarsh, Ravensby and Cricket Green are listed in your papers tonight. So I hope that you will all you have digested the document and you will be discussing whether you feel that it is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Macaulay. Just for clarification, Kieran, can I ask for a layman's question? Is this in essence to be able to control street drinking?
It is.
Okay, that's fine. So that sets the context. And another question, 29th of June running for 4 weeks. There's not a lot of time left. Can I ask do you know roughly how many responses you've had to date?
I don't have the exact number. We've had fairly low responses, I think, as of last week, but we are monitoring it regularly. I'm sorry, Chair, I can't give you
No, fair enough.
that number.
Yeah, okay. So questions. Ed, you've indicated you have a question you'd like to put. So
yep.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Kieran, for the report. I think my concern, Chair, is that we need every control we can get for control of antisocial behaviour, and there was in place a really good PSPO, a public space protection order for the whole borough, and I appreciate the numbers will vary a little bit from year to year, but I am concerned that the current format as presented does seem to exclude Wimbledon Town Centre, and does seem to exclude your own ward, if I understand correctly, Chair, that of course Merton Park. And I think when you actually look at the numbers, I appreciate there's an increase in those wards in Mitcham, but Wimbledon in 2018, 48% of these cases were in Wimbledon. And if you look at the 2019 figures, yes, 38% are Mitcham, but there's still 35% in Wimbledon. So I think there's plenty of evidence there, which I think really merit a proper continuance of a borough-wide approach to this, because we really want to make sure that Wimbledon and of course Merton Park continue to be protected by an order such as this. So that's my comment and question. Can we not go back to the borough-wide approach and also protect Wimbledon Town Centre, Merton Park as well? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think as a discussion point, we might want to come back to that. But Kieran, do you want to respond? And hence my question about street drinking. Is it, whereas I expect Paul would have a view on this too, for Wimbledon Town Centre, the problem arises more from ASB spilling out from bars rather than drinking on the street.
Absolutely. So at section 3 of the report, Chair, because we've obviously consulted with our legal services on there, we had considered the option of keeping the current borough-wide public space protection order in place. I mentioned earlier that there are statutory tests that we need to apply when we're putting in a public space protection order. And if I could just explain a little bit of background, with the old CDZ, the zone that was put in on the previous legislation, local authorities had a choice to either allow that one to continue for a further 2 years, and in October 2017, once that legislation expired, or local authorities had the choice to end that and then look at various pockets in the borough where they could put more localised orders in. So in Merton, I think the decision was made that we would just allow the old CDZ to transition into the public space protection order. So therefore, it wouldn't have been subject to the legal tests that we currently have to apply if we're going to be putting in a new public space protection order. And this is a new one and not an extension. So therefore, if we look at the whole borough, we would need to evidence that literally every ward in that borough that's covered by the public space protection order, that we've got significant evidence of street drinking. So that's one of the reasons why in section 3 that option isn't one that was recommended. However, just taking on board Councillor Gretton's point in relation to Wimbledon, just to reassure you that that area has been raised with me around the nuisance and antisocial behaviour separately. And one of the things about having localised public space protection orders is that when we do start looking at Wimbledon and the issues there, we need to consider what's the most effective interventions that we can put in using some other legislations. And you're quite right, it is linked to some of the bars as opposed to the street drinking. So if need be, if in the Wimbledon town centre there's escalation of street drinking, etc., and there's sufficient evidence, we can implement a localised PSPO here in Wimbledon as well. So it's quite common for a local borough to have multiple localised public space protection orders and not just generally have one across the borough.
Okay, thank you. Let me come to Mansour. Mansour, your question, please. You need to unmute.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. I've got a question. From the summary of figures, table 1 of page number 9, we can see that the antisocial behavior complaints have increased by 23 in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
My question is that what action so far has been taken to reduce this complaint?
Kieran, can you address that one on? So that's about a 1/3 increase, isn't it, from 61 to 84? Is that alarming? And Kieran, you need to unmute. Kieran, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
it was taking a bit of time. So it's not a significant increase, and I do apologise. I'm not going to be able to go back and explain to you what action was taken because I literally just started in Merton this year. However, from my own experience in other areas, there'll be a combination of interventions that would have taken place. So some outreach provision. Our ASB officers would go out as well, and they potentially could have been some fixed penalty notices served for ASB. It really depends on what the breakdown and what type of antisocial behaviour was taking place at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think just to be fair to Karen, I can remember when Neil was there, the reason why that number went up, there was a lot of fixed penalty which was implemented at the time. And I think that's why you've got the number. In 2018, it goes from 61 to 84 because officers were doing the fixed penalty matter. So I think that should answer because I definitely remember because obviously as a cabinet member.
Okay, thank you. Natasha.
Chair, and thank you for the report. Just on the issue of displacement, so as obviously we have Ravensbury, and we're very aware of the issues that we face in terms of antisocial behaviour. Street drinking is an issue, but really mopeds are the biggest issue. But on displacement, this cuts Morden Town Centre into essentially 3 sections. So on one side of the road, say outside Gangley's, you can't drink, by going to the supermarket and drinking on the street. But if you're standing outside Sainsbury's or you're standing outside the Tube, you can, or if you're outside the Civic Centre. My concern is we're not treating that as a kind of holistic space, and town centres tend to draw in people who are congregating to do street drinking. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of thought gone into that specific town centre.
Yeah, Kieran, can you, Morden in particular, because we all come in and out of the Civic Centre.
Sure. So if I could just clarify what the actual prohibition is with the public space protection order, it's not banning drinking, and I think that was a confusion in the previous CDZ. What it is if an authorised officer believes that there's antisocial behaviour taking place where alcohol plays a part in that, which is the street drinkers, they can ask for the drink to be confiscated or the individual to stop drinking or to leave the area. So it's not the prohibition isn't that you're not allowed to drink in public. So I just wanted to clarify that. So the other thing is in terms of Morden. we do need to look at some sort of natural boundaries with the public space protection order. So I will take away your comment around the split that you've just mentioned, because it is really important that, you know, we do try to follow a natural boundary, because we have to explain the PSPO to residents and to the local community. There have to be notices up in the locality, and we have to display a map clearly indicating what's included in the PSPO, which parts are included and which parts aren't. So your comments noted, Councillor.
Okay. Looking around. Peter, Councillor McKay.
So just really to take up the points that Councillor Gretton and Councillor Irons have made, is it not possible to include the whole of Morden Town Centre and the whole of Wimbledon Town Centre? I would certainly support both suggestions.
Kieran, do you want to comment? I mean, obviously, the thinking of Morden, that is the point at which 3 wards come together: Merton Park, Ravensbury, and Helier, and Wimbledon likewise. So it's starting to expand the number of wards included. But can you comment on it, please?
Absolutely. So if Wimbledon, if the Wimbledon Park ward, if that was closer and neighbouring, let's just say one of the boroughs that we're currently looking at, then potentially we could include it. But because it's a couple of wards away, that would need to be subject to its own sort of intervention. So there is something around a public space protection order being in a sort of connected area. For us to take it to and skip a couple of wards, it means that that's a separate public space protection order altogether.
Okay, can I ask, and before I bring Ed back, actually, Ed has chided me for failing to introduce you properly, Kieran, as our new head of Safer Merton and successor to Neil Thurlow. So I forgive the lack of formality there. Ed, what was your concern, though, more for Wimbledon Town Centre rather than your own ward of Wimbledon Park?
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
I mean,
Okay.
we do experience issues in Wimbledon Park. We see, unfortunately, drinking in the children's playground, the water play and that sort of thing in the middle of the daytime, which is totally unacceptable. But really, I was thinking of Trinity, Dundonald, Hillside. Those are the 3 wards, of course, that are relevant to the town centre. And if just legally you have to have 2 separate applications, then to me it would seem right and proper to put that application in for Wimbledon Town Centre in parallel to this, so 2 go in at the same time, if that's what the officers need to set out to get one of these orders. Otherwise, you've got potentially a very long 6-month process, which should be delayed for a few months when this one goes through. So it could be another year at least before Trinity and Dundonald and Hillside and Wimbledon Town Centre benefit as well from one of these orders.
Okay. Looking around. I'm just yeah, Paul, please.
Hi. I would like us to use tools that work and when there's a reason for them. Natasha's point seems a good one. If people just walked to the other side of the road, it would seem crazy, of course, if they were given this instruction. Are you limited to wards, or can you demarcate within a ward? So could you increase all of Morden, or would you have to do all of the wards to do so?
So we're not, we can go within wards as well. It doesn't have to be ward boundaries at all. It's just for the ease of the map. We've covered that, but most definitely, like I said, we can follow other natural boundaries. We can, take it into part of a ward. And as we said, the consultation is live. The feedback that you've provided also will be noted. So all of this will be taken into consideration before we sort of agree the final geographical nature of the public space protection order. And that is indeed the purpose of the consultation, to see, if residents, it's a borough-wide consultation, if there are other areas that people feel that need to be covered, that'll all be taken into consideration.
Okay, and with regard to the area, I know in Trinity, I'm not aware of much street drinking in the high street. I don't know if Ed is. I am concerned about street drinking in places like South Park Gardens at times. Some of the some of the green spaces. As I say, I'm not aware of street drinking in the high street. The issue there is, of course, the bars, and some bars serving people who are clearly drunk, and that's a separate issue which this won't address, of course.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, can I just come in? I
Please
think,
do.
Councillor Kohler, what you said, what happened in 2013 when we had a borough-wide controlled drinking, most of the drinking were taking place around Centre Court. But because we had fixed penalty notices being imposed, and the courts, I always remember when I sat on a Monday in the magistrate's court, most of the cases were around Wimbledon, town centre. But when the fixed penalty came into force, we had less work in the courts. I definitely remember that, and it was confined to the local bars around the Wimbledon area. I think that made a difference with the fixed penalty. Saying, I think what Karen is saying, I think we can go back, because I don't think we have to be complacent. We got to listen to what people have said. We may have to look at Wimbledon Town Centre as, added to the other 5 wards, which has been, indicated. Thank you.
Can't hear you, Peter.
Hello.
Joan, please. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Karen. Hi, nice to meet you. Okay, I just want to find out what time of the day or late evening do you find more effective with the street drinkers?
So usually it's in the sort of afternoon and evenings, but things have obviously changed since COVID and lockdown. Behaviours have changed. There's, more sort of nuisance and antisocial behaviour in our parks and open spaces. So it's early to say what potentially could happen and where individuals will be gathered, but usually it's in the afternoon and evenings and late evenings.
Thank you. And Paul again, please. Councillor Kohler.
From what Edith has said then, if there was, predates my time as a councillor, if there was a problem with street drinking in Centre Court, there is presumably danger of that returning unless we have one of these orders. Can we, on that historic evidence, say, well, look, it solved it, but it has been a problem, and there's no reason why it wouldn't be a problem in the future? Would that pass the legal test?
Do you want to comment, Kieran? Please, yeah, go ahead.
So as we said, it is pretty flexible. We can have a look. There's only maybe a certain period of time that we can go back and look at the data. We've gone back at least 2 years, which is like the 2 summers, because we're looking at some of the trends and the seasonal trends with street drinking. But as I did mention before, I mean, we are going to have an engagement enforcement plan, and I've already convened a multi-agency meeting to discuss that with colleagues from Westminster Drugs Project, from our local safer neighbourhood teams and some of our outreach services. So we're hoping to keep a good eye on the activity in that location. So Councillor Henry mentioned around time. So that's when we'll be looking at tasking, our officers, including the police. If, for example, it's in a particular day of the week or in the evening, we can task officers. And if we feel, as you've just said, that things reoccur, then we can obviously put in other interventions other than just a PSPO. But if I could just also address that the length of time was mentioned earlier by one of the councillors, the length of time it takes for us to put a public space protection order in. And it's a conversation that I've been having internally in terms of with colleagues around what the process potentially could be for us authorising a public space protection order. So because this is covering multiple wards, it's important that we do take it through the committee and for cabinet, but potentially if we wanted a more localised public space protection order, which only affects a single ward, we could consider options of having a more faster way of authorisation. So it could be potentially in consultation with the chair of this committee and the ward members and a lead member. So there can be delegated authority to a senior officer to do that. So it all depends on how we would like to sort of move forward in terms of how we authorise PSPOs in the borough, but certainly there should be a method by which we're able to put and use this tool swiftly when we need to in more localised and small areas.
Thank you. John, you indicated you'd like to speak on this one. Councillor Dehaney?
Yes, Chair, as we Graveney Ward is noted for street drinkers. We have a betting shop. Next to the betting shop, there's a little grocery shop that sells drinks. And you don't always see them drinking. They're getting very clever. They carry the drink in a brown paper bag. But when you look on the streets around the roots of the trees, piles of empty cans, beer cans, and bottles, and you know that it's just street drinking. Sometimes in the evening, they congregate at Garden Avenue and Streatham Road. And lots of particular ladies complain they got a bit scared in passing all these men standing there drinking. So it's one of the areas that are prominent for street drinking. So whatever order you're going to come in, take in operation has to include Graveney Ward, because street drinking is very bad there. You see the empty cans all along the road. You don't always see them drinking, but the empty cans are there. The street drinkers is around. So that's very important.
Yeah.
I think I can comment on that. I think I remember when we were doing, Siobhan McDonough was doing the campaign for Bobby's on the Beat for 6 weeks. I remember standing there every Friday, and Joan was asking about time. I couldn't believe it. Around Graveney, Cricket Green, and Fitzmash, it was in the morning, and people were holding bottles of beer early in the morning. I saw it myself, and it was absolutely dreadful. And as John quite rightly said, Park Avenue in Graveney Ward was notorious,
Garden Avenue
and Garden Avenue. Yes, they were notorious for early drinking in the morning. And I think they were the worst wards, in the whole of the borough, where people were drinking early in the morning. It was absolutely dreadful.
Okay, yes, thank you. Certainly the report does highlight Graveney, doesn't it? Let me come to Councillor Pritchard next.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I've got 2 statements to make and 2 questions. The first statement really is that I can't help but feel that the sample size is too small, right? It's only looking at 2 years. And whether or not we can make an honest sort of estimate of what things do. And that's particularly prevalent when we're looking at 2 years, and now we're looking for what is a strategic shock to the way that people interact. Okay, so I'm dubious about the evidence necessary to do something. And that leads to my second point as to what the default is. Because if you listen to the tone of the conversation, it's like a default to wanting to actually have a universal PSPO. Or can we have it in this area as well? And I think there's a fundamental question there about, when I remember when Councillor McLean took charge, his first speech was he hates 2 things, taxes and bans, right? So the question is our default to a ban, especially if the evidence is so thin? And I'm far more authoritarian than many people here when it comes on the liberal side of things, but I think we need to have that honest discussion. The third is I can't really get to is a question. I can't really get to the hub of, if we're only doing it in a fixed amount of areas, does that mean we can put more resources into the enforcement there? Or because it comes from a sort of army aphorism, which is defend everything and you defend nothing. So should we just be looking at the areas which are really concerning? And then the other point is, I'm not clear, is it more efficient to do multiple areas at the same time? So that's linked in both terms of application and delivery. So 2 statements, 2 questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, okay. Kieran, so quite a, what about this point of, does it help to better focus resource in a limited number of wards, or is that not really an issue?
I think most definitely. I think part of this is managing public expectations. So if you've got a borough-wide public space protection order, then our partners and our own internal resources need to have the ability to be active and enforce. In order to be active and enforce, they need to be out on the street to either issue the FPN or witness the nuisance and antisocial behaviour taking place. From my own experience, putting in more targeted public space protection orders means that it's exactly what I mentioned earlier, that, you know, I've been able to convene a multi-agency meeting with partners. I've been able to focus on those particular wards, or whichever wards this PSPO ends up covering, and getting a more targeted response in those localities from the partnership. It is more effective because it's a bigger challenge trying to do it across a whole borough piece. So certainly it's more effective and more efficient to have a more targeted approach. And the other point that was raised just around the ASB legislation itself is very broad. So, you know, it talks about, you know, if somebody causes or is likely to cause nuisance and antisocial behaviour, the guidance itself is quite broad around consultation. It could be 4 weeks, 6 weeks. So it's really around us looking at what we think is sensible and proportionate locally, and our interpretation of that guidance.
Thank you for that. Councillor McKay, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I find myself disagreeing with Owen, and I'd like to kind of support John, because I have seen what he's just described in that area, and Edith has supported that. My feeling is that we were discussing earlier the possibility of empowering the chair in consultation with the cabinet member and the ward members to extend this. I think that's a very sensible course to adopt. I think, coming back to Natasha's suggestion, there's no reason at all why we need to put the entire wards in, but we could just draw a circle around Morden Town Centre and deal with that issue. And the same is true of Wimbledon. You know, if we don't need to put the whole of sort of Wimbledon Park or Trinity, but just that area around the town centre where there may be difficulties would be fine. And you know, I think street drinking is a problem, and I mean the evidence that Owen is talking about comes from the eyes of 3 of his fellow councillors in the case of Graveney Ward, and I'm sure Councillor Gretton could give us examples in the Wimbledon area. So I think we should adopt that approach. I think it would give us that flexibility. We don't need to do the whole ward, but we should address the problem where it is greatest, and those are the areas that we should be going for.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. Let me come to Joan, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I want to agree with what Peter said. And also, I think if we look back into people's behavior, street drinkers, they do move around. So I think what Natasha also said, we look into a borough-wide, but the hotspots. For example, what John had said, that's a hotspot. So we look all around different areas, but target the hotspots. And I think, you know, that will help. I think we are lucky in Pollard's Hill because we haven't got any pubs or bars or anything like that. So we don't, you know, have any problem with street drinkers. So, you know, that might take.
Okay. I mean, I think we have here a fairly clear indication that members would like to see. Now, let me preface this. I think we have to recognise that we are talking about street drinking in such a manner as to intimidate members of the public, or make an area undesirable, or one that people seek to avoid. So it is not street drinking per se, as Kieran has rightly pointed out. It is when it becomes such as to frighten people and make an area one that they want to avoid. So I think we're really saying, in addition to what's proposed here, we would like to see this developed so that it could also cover such unacceptable street drinking in Morden Town Centre and Wimbledon Town Centre. And I think we are saying too that that does not need to be what's the word? Not collinear, but it does not have to be wholly within ward boundaries. That's probably too sweeping. Indeed, I can remember a restriction for Morden Town Centre some years ago that stopped at Kenley Road, and so it was just circumscribing the centre and not all three of the wards that make up Morden Town Centre. I mean, is it your wish, members, that we do add Wimbledon Town Centre and Morden Town Centre to the areas we would like to see covered by this? Natasha, you wanted to comment now?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I don't know, because I think then the hotspots in the borough are taken care of, but also I think it is an important thing for us to remember about resource and enforcement, because there is no point us having a borough-wide restriction if there is not enough resource to enforce it. No. So I think having it targeted in town centres, I mean, we do have, if you wanted to keep the whole of Ravensbury ward in it, fine. We do have a couple of green spaces where people congregate and tend to do things they shouldn't be doing. But I think, yeah, just we have to be mindful of resource and not just spreading things too free.
And Ed, you wanted to come back on that too?
No, I think we've reached a good consensus.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wouldn't be concerned about the legal challenge, really. Somebody would have to, as long as we get the process correct, and the officers, I'm sure, will do that. To make it unlawful, somebody would effectively have to bring a judicial review within 90 days, and I think there's good evidence for it, and I'm sure the officers will get the process right. So I see that as an extremely remote risk, and shouldn't discourage us from proceeding as we've discussed.
Good, thank you. So if to sum up then, Kieran, if you can take on board that we would like to look at ways of extending this to Morden and Wimbledon town centres within. We recognise the constraints on resource. We recognise that it must be street drinking in a manner as to cause a nuisance, to cause a certain threat or level of intimidation. So I see Julia has appeared now to tell me that she wants something rather more coherently worded than that, or?
No, not at all. I was just going to advise on process.
Please.
And I was going to suggest that rather than writing a separate reference paper that went to Cabinet, that I draft some text for you to sign off that could then be included in the Cabinet report as a whole. So where they feed back on the consultation, there's a section in there with the Commission's comments, and then with Cabinet's response or the officer's response to that.
That would be ideal. Thank you.
Good.
And yes, if everyone's content there, if I can just thank Kieran and also thank Councillor Macaulay for their contributions on this item. Karen, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, it's more in-house matters now. We have the annual report, which you will find on page 23. I've really lived with this for too long to see it objectively now. So and it has, obviously, each section has been signed off by the chair of that particular scrutiny panel. So I'm really looking at this stage for your support in taking this to council.
Chair?
Yes.
Hello, just one thing I'd like to highlight straight away is you refer in your foreword to a budget deficit of 35 million. That's not an accurate figure. And with my meetings with Caroline Holland, that's already gone down to 30 million. And since those meetings, and as was discussed in council at length last week, that number is coming down. So that's simply not an accurate number, 35 million.
Okay, I'm more than happy to modify that. Whether I put a figure in at all or just talk about substantial, but Julia, I'm looking to you.
Yeah, I think it is changing obviously all the time. So I think rewording as substantial would cover, or predicted to be substantial or something like that.
Yes, yes. And Peter, Councillor McCabe.
Chair, I think Councillor McLean has a fair point, and that we should get an accurate figure, recognising that it will change from day to day. We live in very uncertain times, but what I would be prepared to do is for you to have a conversation with the Director of Finance, and that figure be included when the report has to be written, and you know, she can confirm that, and that should satisfy everyone. And other than that, I would like to move the acceptance of the report so that you can present it to council, and I hope somebody will second that.
Thank you, Peter. And Owen, you're content to second? Thank you very much. Any dissent from the adoption then of the report, subject to that correction of the amount? So that's agreed. Thank you all. We have next, it's not really itemised, but at our September meeting, we will be meeting with the new Borough Commander. Her name is Liz Chappell, and we should be thinking about questions we want to put to her, because by submitting well in advance, we get a better quality of analysis. I mean, the only thing I've thought thus far, it will be interesting to get the views of the police on what it's been like to have to enforce lockdown provisions, especially as we move towards some degree of relaxation. Will they get involved in having to enforce the wearing of masks and that kind of thing? But if I can ask you to think about this, and certainly by mid-August to have your questions via your group offices to submit. Unless anyone knows the question that they have now. Ed, please.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, just to be clear, if we've got questions on subjects, like I'm sure we'll want to ask questions about safer neighbourhood teams, community policing, as well as the COVID crisis issues which you just mentioned. Also, I'm sure we'll be wanting to ask about the police's own plans on carbon reduction. Some of the police forces around the country are already setting out their plans to take their own forces to net zero by 2030 and so on, or some forces are 2040 and all this type of thing. So I was hoping to ask the Borough Commander about the police, Merton Police's plans in that respect as well. I don't know what the specific questions are. I think they're fairly high level ones likely to be, but those are likely topics. And I hope, does it matter if come August we don't actually necessarily set out the specific questions, the more sort of general high level ones, but we'll be able to say we like to ask generally to high level about the status on the police's carbon reduction plans or community policing within the wards and so
on. I think if I were a new Borough Commander, Ed, I would worry a little bit about terms like general and high level. I think I'd like to see something that I could get my teeth into and deliver a cogent answer. But equally, yes, I'd try and draft something down, and I would invite you to lead on that topic when we have the meeting. Owen.
On this, I think there is something specifically about the new operational deployment. We've had from the BCU previously that I think they had, I don't know, about 1,300 personnel under a command, and how it was split down and how it was effectively used. I thought that was enlightening at the time, and how much flex or how little flex there was. We could even fix staff appointments, and then and what was on community policing. Since then, we've seen probably, I don't know if we've seen certain things could have happened, but one is a reduction in the throughput of trained police officers. Secondly, is an increased demand now on enforcing certain things, not least possibly wearing masks. Thirdly, we have our community protection orders like we've just been discussing. It'd be interesting to know what the organisational structural resource layout is now, what the new demands are in a sort of not post-COVID world, but COVID world, and what, you know, the sort of implications for safer Merton and what we do of that. I can't, you know, I can write all that down, but I can't ask it, I suppose, through a series of questions, because what I want is an old organogram, a new organogram, and an explanation of why they're different and what the sort of SWOT analysis of it is. Because I think by listening to the commander's insight of how he or she uses limited resources, we really get a flavour for what we can recommend and achieve. So I think that'd be one of the most useful things now.
Fine, again, if I could invite you to lead on that, Owen, when we have the meeting. Yeah. Other thoughts for the BC? No. Yes, Natasha, please.
I think for our residents, there's definitely a perception that you call 999 or you call 101, you don't get a response, and there's never enough. It's never taken seriously, the kind of low-level moped riding up and down your road every night. So I would be really keen to understand what the plans are to kind of tackle this low-level nuisance stuff, that where the safer neighbourhood team sign off at 5 o'clock and it goes over to the blue lights. What happens to the stuff that falls between the gap of that? Because it just doesn't seem to be anyone paying much attention to it, and that stuff is the stuff that escalates and turns into to real problems. But then also just, you know, what are we doing? Community engagement stuff around Black Lives Matter. How are we ensuring that our police are representing the communities they serve, and using stop and search with data and with intelligence, not just as a blunt tool, but to use it the way it should be used, which is with intelligence and data, and not just on just random suspicions.
I think that's the kind of question. If we can get it presented in good time, then there should be a chance for them to produce the evidence, particularly on stop and search and how it's being used, and also the ethnic makeup of the police force and how that's changing.
And if we're going to add one more specific thing to that, sorry, it's actually a number of times the armed police or physical police intervene to get into a house. They have a team for it that they call when officers need to get into a house and they carry the bar and they're armed or what have you. What I'm interested in is the ethnic makeup of the residents of those houses as proportion to the population, because there's anecdotal suggestions that they've been used more in cases of black people who are residents in houses. So whether or not that's true in Merton, I'd be interested.
Yeah, valid. Councillor McCabe, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask whether the basic command unit commander believes that it is important for there to be continuity and stability within the senior police ranks, because I know there have been some health issues over the years, but my feeling is that we seem to see new faces with such regularity, and I wonder how you can possibly run an organisation when there is this constant movement and people changing and disappearing and coming and going. It must be disruptive. I don't think it's conducive to good governance of an organisation. It's nearly as bad as the sort of cabinet members, but perhaps I shouldn't stray into that area. But you get my point. There's been too much chopping and changing, and perhaps we should ask her how long she's planning to stay. And you know, footballers are required to sign a contract saying that they will stay at whatever team they're playing for a period. I know you can't put a ball and chain around such people, but I do think they should give a commitment to seeing the job through, because every time there's a change, there seems to be a different direction that they're following.
I have a suspicion that it's not within the gift of RBCs to know necessarily how long they're.
Well, maybe she could take that back to her more senior colleagues within the Met.
Let me come to Joan.
Thank you, Peter. My question would be, when there is an incident or accident, there always been at least 12, 10 or more police officers turn up. And of course, sometimes when you do have a great issue or concern and phone for the police, you never can get any. So this is, I mean, matter of fact, from my experience, I saw in Mitcham Town Centre a few weeks ago, there were there was an incident with a young boy, and the safer neighborhood rang in for an officer or something, and there were 7 police officers in 3 different vehicles turn up, and at the end of the day, they only question the person and walk away. For me, that's a waste of resources. So that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Paul, you were wanted to. Sorry, Julia, you wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on the stop and search that this came up before, and we did have lined up for the cancelled March meeting the chair of the stop and search monitoring group, and I wondered if you'd like me to invite them to attend in September. I see people nodding.
Yes, I see. Yes, yes.
Okay.
I think. I mean, particularly now more than ever, really. Yeah. Paul.
Julia, like radar in MASH, anticipated what I was just about to say then. Thank you. We have a real opportunity here. This is a danger with just councillors talking, but this is a new borough commander. I think we have a chance not to be too inquisitorial, but to enter into a dialogue. I had a really useful meeting with Sally last week when we discussed stop and search, speeding HGVs, and restorative justice. And I thought, if only we'd had this conversation at the beginning rather than the end. And I think we can use this meeting for that sort of dialogue. So let's not look for too many answers. Let's share some of our concerns and where we think the priorities of the borough are, because that's a way I think we could really set this forward. And in Sally's defence, I think there was ill health. That's why she left early. So I don't think we should.
Yes, I think that's, and I will, incidentally, it's been on my mind to write to Sally on behalf of all of us to thank her for her work with us in the last 3 years. So, but she's always been very, very willing to come along and to answer questions and discuss with us, and I've appreciated that. Anything else? I think we've got a pretty full agenda, haven't we, already, for points we'd like to raise. But I do take Paul's point on board that encouraging dialogue is we're not there to find fault or to trick our new BC up in any way. We would like a confident working relationship with her. Okay, good. Okay, scrutiny improvement plan. This is on page 47. And we have looked at this before, so really it's just to adopt it tonight. Trying to remember the number. We had Ed, we had Councillor Sally Kenny, Paul, myself working on this. So the main players are here. Ed, you want a question on this one?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just have one question, and I know it was great to run through the process, looking at scrutiny, how we might improve it. And it's something which we didn't actually discuss during the process, but now in the context of the COVID crisis, I'm sure we're all extremely aware of it. And I was going to suggest and see what other members thought about it for the task groups. I know sometimes, you know, we found it difficult to travel those 1 or 2 hours to get to the task groups. It would be really great if those task groups, which are really sort of deep dives into policy and that sort of thing, might help us save time and more time to prepare and ease congestion on the road as well. Can we have the option to move those task groups to a virtual format like Zoom meetings or whatever the officers propose as the best way to do that? I think would provide a lot more flexibility, because I found in task groups a lot of the time different members and councillors had to cancel them and had to continually, and I know Julia Regan will nodding ahead because she saw this time and time again, and you will have seen, Chair, yourself, had to continually move the dates around. So is that in the planning now? And if it isn't in the planning, can we recommend that at least be considered somehow, the task groups and can move to a virtual format if members of those task groups find it convenient for them?
Yes, I mean, this was largely drafted pre-COVID, and we're learning all the time, aren't we, about the benefits of doing things this way. And I've thought, talking to councillors remotely in other boroughs or in other counties, I mean, Merton is compact by comparison with Cornwall, for example. You know, how much time must we be saving by remote, by meeting virtually like this, rather than asking people to drive 80 or 100 miles to a county headquarters? So yeah, let's adapt. Let's adapt. I had other people wanting. Sally, please. Sally?
Peter, thank you. One thing I just wanted to bring up, it was under 2.5 on page 48. You've written about increased satisfaction with call-in, and there was the one where one of the call-in on the parking charges was referred back to Cabinet and one wasn't. Now, with that one that wasn't, there was animosity from the public, and I was subject to a verbal attack by a woman, flaying her hands and shouting at me. And there was only one member of all of you who stayed behind to give me any sort of support from this woman. And I want to think of looking at the safety of people on this committee, on the commission, when there is a call-in that is contentious and people don't get what they want, the animosity they may subject to members. All right, I felt all right and I didn't get angry, but she could have been intimidating, and I don't know if she would have flipped. So I do think that perhaps in future, when we have something like that, it might be important to make sure that the public have left before everyone clears off and leaves just one member subject to a verbal attack. That's all it was.
Julia, I'm looking.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that happened, Councillor Kenny, and I didn't realise at the time. And what we will do in future is make sure that the scrutiny officer stays in the room until the public have gone, when there is a call-in or when there is something controversial. I will definitely take that forward.
Yeah, I'm not blaming anyone in particular.
No, I know.
But it was quite a shock that they had that ability to do it. And I think we just need to bear in mind for the future, really.
Yes, no, thank you, Sally. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I think the member that Sally was referring to on that occasion, and I think most of you that know me will know that I'm always up for a bit of a row. And if there's something like that going on, I'll be straight in there. But seriously, I think we do all have a responsibility to one another. And if that is even considered likely, that we have a responsibility to kind of make sure that we're all okay, regardless of political party or anything like that. We're here to serve the public, you know, I've actually been in far worse situations than that, Sally over the years. But you know, that, and you know, seriously feeling threatened by a member of the public, and when that happens, we should close ranks, and it shouldn't be left to scrutiny officers, because you know, they are just as vulnerable as we are. But if we stick together, then I think we'll all be safer.
Yes, I'd endorse that. Owen, you wanted to contribute here.
No, I think all the points have been covered fairly. I was actually initially just going to say how supportive I was of Councillor Gretton. I think the more meetings that are done in this way, of these type, the better. I don't see us losing that much by the way they're conducted, and I see us gaining a great deal.
Okay, thank you. Because the other point really about these improvement plans, they only work if we get behind them. So it's all very well having the action points, but we do need to ensure they come alive, and we do deliver on them. So okay. So if we're content with that, but Ed's point is a good one, that we, like it or not, we have been precipitated into new ways of working. Some of them are good, and we should take those on board and adapt for the future too. Our very last item is...
Chair, just
yeah.
Before if we're talking about new ways of working, then you know, and I agree with what Ed is saying, although I'm a bit concerned that he's probably joined the league of people that are refusing to go back to work at any point in the future and stay at home all the time. But what I did want to say is that we really ought to sort out the issue of voting and not having roll calls that, you know, we seem to spend half the time there. You know, in other councils, there is a button that you press for, you know, agree or yes or no, or whatever it is. You know, that's such a simple issue, and we could save a lot of time. And I think Ed is talking about saving time. I just find that really frustrating every time we have to go through a full roll call. And of course, while we are in this situation, every vote is a roll call. It's not beyond the wit of man to solve it.
Yes, I think that would be one for our head of legal, wouldn't it? But we are meant to be reviewing these things quite shortly with the group leads, so that's one worth taking on board. Because I do agree with you, it's a ponderous process, isn't it? As a full council last night. And I mean, it came about because of the need to be absolutely clear on planning how people had voted, but it's fine with a committee of 10. It's not so good with a full council of 60. So okay. So I go on to the work programme for the, have we dealt with that? We haven't yet, have we? I think the one thing I want to flag up here particularly, if we can formally agree to re-establish the financial monitoring task group tonight, that would then allow officers to start looking for dates to put in the calendar for the year ahead. We did agree previously in principle that we would like the FMTG to continue. So we need now to start getting some dates put together and for people to start thinking about whether they want to become members of that or continue as members. Can I take that as agreed? Thank you. And Julia.
Yeah, are there any people who want to put themselves forward already to be on the financial monitoring group? I will email all councillors and see who wants to do it. Okay, I'll just write your names down. Just keep your hands up, please. I've got Paul, Peter, Natasha, Ed, Owen. Joan, that's a big task group.
It is getting big, isn't it? Yeah.
6. Okay, and then obviously I'll email all the councillors and see if, because obviously they don't all have to be from the commission.
No,
okay.
no, not at all. No.
And just to let you know that Rosy Mckeever will be the scrutiny officer who is going to lead on providing support both to the Commission and to the Financial Monitoring Task Group. So she'll be the person you'll get emails from about that.
So that's Julia's way of telling us that this is her last meeting with us, which I think is a. I'm a bit sad about that. I won't be make any bones about it, but she has been a fantastic scrutiny manager for the last 11 years in Merton. You know, and having worked with her very closely throughout that time, I can tell you just how good she is. She's always been very measured, very discreet. It's difficult to get her to say what she really thinks about some of the things we get up to, and but her advice has always been well balanced, and I've always had utter confidence in the way she's assisted us and the way she's run the department. And we do have one. I do go to the London Scrutiny Network. We do, I'm convinced, have one of the best scrutiny operations amongst London's 32 boroughs. So there you are. Sad evening in many ways. You will be missed, Julia. I know I've told you that before, but I'll say it again. So, but you do leave a good legacy behind you with Stella and Rosie, and I'm sure they will live up to the good example you set.
Thank you, thank you. I can't believe it's been 11 years. It's gone so quickly. It's the longest I've ever worked anywhere, and I have really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed working with all of you, and I think that Scrutiny has achieved a lot in Merton. I think there's some very good quality work, particularly in the task groups, and particularly in terms of there being such a respectful culture in Scrutiny and between Scrutiny and the Cabinet, and that enables your recommendations to actually be implemented. And the way that you monitor those makes that happen as well. So sort of thank you and goodbye, and yeah, and just carry on doing what you're doing, and continuing to sort of try out different things to improve and look at the quality rather than the quantity of what you do. Parting advice.
Okay, thank you, Julia. We'll follow that. Yeah. Virtual safe journeys then, everyone. Okay.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Julia. It's been terrific, professional, very calm. Thank you.